Whoa, I wish we really looked like that when performing. Hey everybody, welcome to Feedback. Welcome back to Feedback for those of you joining us again. This is episode 6. Erica Scheinberg is joining us today to talk with Aaron Einbond. Aaron is one of the few composers who has worked with us on multiple pieces, and we'll be talking about both. So don't forget, you can always send questions ahead of time to feedback@yarnwire.org, or join the live chat today on YouTube to submit questions in real time. All right, Erica, turn it over to you. So happy that you guys could be here.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. It's great to see all of you. I am very happy to be here again. And I want to, I guess, get things started by asking you all a question about how Aaron made that first connection with the group and how you all started working together. So if you could talk a little bit about the origin story of your collaboration with the group.
I
guys
think
want to get started, or?
You go ahead, Aaron.
It all began at Domaine Forget in
Oh, wow.
in Quebec, where Russell and I met in 2000 and I don't know, a long time ago.
It must have been like 2003 or something.
Something like that. And I don't think we played any music together that summer. We definitely talked a lot about music and about some of Russell's plans, and maybe even about some fantasy Russell had to put together a percussion and piano ensemble someday. That
Man,
maybe
Russell was talking about this with everybody back then.
It's out.
And we kept in touch over the years, and I moved back to New York in 2009, and that was when you were getting started with the commissioning project that led to Tone Builders.
That's right. There's another aspect, though. I think, well, Ian and I played a piece of yours in 2006 called Leaping Lizards.
Yes.
And percussion duo, great piece. Very different than what you wrote for Yarnwire. And I forget why we did that. I mean, we had the connection at Domaine Forget, and I think the Berkeley connection also.
Did you overlap at all at Berkeley? Were you there at all at the same time? No.
I don't think we did, but you were there with Mei Fong.
That's right. Yeah. I came, I guess, a year or two after Russell was finished, and Russell was kind of a legend there. So I heard lots of stuff. and from Mei Fong and from others.
Yeah.
So I definitely, his reputation preceded him.
I forgot about Domaine Forget too. I think, didn't we meet Austin there?
That's right.
Williman there?
Austin Williman.
Yeah. Wow.
Okay.
Now of the Jack Quartet.
And what were the pieces that you all have worked on together? Can you kind of introduce those two pieces that we're going to talk about today? Maybe someone from Yarnwire take this question.
Yeah, sure. So the first piece that we worked with on Aaron was, again, for that 2010 commissioning project, was called Composing New York City, or Composing NYC. And we premiered this piece, I believe, on the same program that we premiered David Franson's piece at Greenwich House Music School. And the piece is called Passage Work. And it's a really amazing piece that Aaron conceptualized first by making a lot of these really beautiful field recordings in Paris. And these were the arcades, right, Aaron? Correct me if I'm wrong. And
I love that picture.
I know, it's such a great picture.
This is one of the pieces that we'll talk about sort of in some depth today. And then the second piece that we're going to talk about is The Kind of Problem a City Is from 2016. But are there other sort of collaborations or other work that you've all done together besides these two pieces?
You know, I did another set of field recording pieces with Aaron, and I forget. There's a Berlin one, Die Mauer, I think was one, and then Mauer Park, yeah. And that it was in a way, thinking about it now, it's kind of, it wasn't like a sketch of like the cities, but it kind of shared a similar kind of setup for me and kind of. Vibe.
Yeah, it's kind of in the same series. And Passage Work, you know, is our first collaboration together, even though Russell and I had known each other a few years, and I had met Laura before and Ian. But it was also one of my first pieces to use kind of field recordings in that way. So actually, that was a real breakthrough for me. And then I carried on with that other piece Russell mentioned, and then eventually with the kind of problem a city is.
Mm-hmm. And it sounds like a lot of other pieces that you've written have also incorporated field recordings since then. Is that true?
Yeah, absolutely. It turned out to be a really important strand in my composing. So there was one piece just before Passage Work where I first introduced them, but they were nowhere near as explicit or as audible. It was, and I think that was the first piece where I had the courage to really bring them to the foreground and expose them and make them, in a way, the subject of the composition.
Yeah.
Did you, Aaron, when did this happen with your like sonic postcards? Because you used to send out some emails with, I don't know, documentation of where you were in that year and stuff.
Yeah, right. Russell's referring to the fact that instead of sending people sort of Christmas visual cards every year, most years I try to send out an audio file to people I know. They're usually a minute or two, just snapshot of a particular place that I went that year that I was spending time. And they started right around the same time as Passage Work. So that all kind of happened together. And really one fed the other. And from that point on, I really began to incorporate these postcards into lots of different pieces that I was working on.
Great. So I want to sort of dive into Passage Work. I don't know if we have an image of the album, but I have the CD here. So this was nice. A work that you all recorded in 2010, and I want us to sort of take a look at the score. Oh, there we go. better image. So we'll start by listening to a few short excerpts from the work, and I think even before we do that, we have an image of the note that you wrote for the published score. So I thought we would take a look at that. You explain that the passages of the title refer to the arcades of Paris. These are those hidden alleyways that are often lined with shops and restaurants and that have glass ceilings to let in the light. We'll see some pictures of these arcades. They're built around the turn of the 19th century, but very few of them are still in existence in Paris, right? So they're this kind of relic from the past, in a way. And I want to just read a few sentences from your note here to explain that kind of explain the work. Field recordings made in the covered passageways of Paris are taken as source material for the work's minute, rough, fragmentary soundscape. Each passage recording is colored by architecture, time of day, accidental noises, and fellow visitors. These tone colors are in turn transcribed using computer models into dense textures of instrumental playing techniques. As the performers act upon the pianos with mallets, small percussion instruments, contact microphones, and loudspeakers, the pianos themselves become passages leading from one imagined environment to the next. So we're going to listen to 3 clips from the recording. In the first clip, we'll just hear an excerpt from the very beginning of the piece, and then in the second clip, we'll see some images of the arcades, and we're going to hear the end of one of these field recordings that you made in the arcades, along with the sounds of the musicians of Yarn Wire playing various percussion instruments, including sandpaper. I think the second excerpt starts with some sandpaper sounds, and it's all inside the body of the piano, I think, in that excerpt. So we'll hear them also playing directly on the strings of the instrument. And then in the third excerpt, and I think we'll listen to them sort of all in a row. I'm going to actually quote a description that Aaron wrote of the third excerpt. One percussionist uses a bird call to mimic distant birds in a neighboring park, while the other uses homemade foam mallets and fingertips to excite resonances corresponding to an automobile engine outside the arcade's exit. So let's listen to these 3 clips now.
Nice.
Yeah. So Aaron, I just want to ask you an open-ended question about the field recordings, if we can start there. How do you use them in this particular piece?
Well, so I made those recordings before I knew what piece I was going to write with them. They were things I was beginning to collect, like postcards, as we were discussing before. Mm-hmm. And the part of this piece that we didn't talk about much yet is interacting with the performers. And another thing that I started doing right around that same time was to really begin pieces by making recordings with performers with yarn wire. And you were one of the first groups that I did that with as a kind of prerequisite to begin composing the piece. And so really I kind of came to the studio with these two sets of recordings, the recordings of Paris and the recordings that I made talking with, I think I looked at different percussion instruments with Russell, looked at different piano techniques with Laura, and those became the building blocks for the score as well. And the main relationship between them is there's a kind of transcription process where a lot of the recordings are transcribed using the computer, but also using a lot of subjective decisions on my part into an instrumental score based on the recordings that I made with these performers. And so that's a really important part of all of my music since then that began pretty much here, that it's really not just about any percussionist or any percussion instrument or any percussionist or any pianist. It's about that specific person. It's about the members of Yarn Wire. It's about the specific instruments that they decided to bring to show me at that session. It's about the particular sounds that they love to make with those instruments, or that only they can make with those instruments. Occasionally that can lead to trouble if they show me something in the recording session that they don't always want to reproduce, or it's not so easy to reproduce. But and then of course, when the score gets done, we talk about it and look at if things need to be adjusted.
Ian, what do you remember? I'm going to put you on the spot. What do you remember about that session when you made those recordings before the score existed?
I'm actually not totally sure if I was part of the recording for Passage Work. I very much remember the recording session for Cities later on.
I think you definitely were, because we like try these mallets and like the collection of instruments is definitely, you can tell whose is whose, I feel like.
It
Yeah.
was 10 years ago.
It was
10
a long
plus,
time
actually,
ago.
I think.
We have pictures of the instruments.
Oh, okay.
Should we look at them and maybe it'll jog your memory?
I remember making the foam mallets for sure. Like these like foamy mallets.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
So those were the original instruments, and then here.
And this for sure.
Yeah, Russell, you want to talk about what
I think this is Ian's setup, because mine is like my usual, Waldteufel, and that might have begun from this time period. And that Crotale setup looks like something you would have done.
I think I was like recently into like filter sweeps with rattan mallet on the block. Like that's I'm remembering now. You're right.
There's a lot of that in this piece. And Laura, the instruments the implements that we saw in that last slide were actually to be used inside the piano. Is that right?
Those actually, I think those are from my setup for Cities.
Okay.
I'm trying to think back to Passage Work and the implements that we use. Well, we did a lot of sort of silent depression of chords that were activated by those cool sort of Muppet-like mallets that you saw. That's how I remember them. They're like little Muppets. I think there's a lot of guitar. There is guitar pick though on piano string for sure.
And Super Ball on woodblock.
Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe that was.
So still relevant, even though it was a different piece.
Person.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's still in our vocab. All of those implements and instruments are definitely in our wheelhouse. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So it does sound, in fact, like some of the techniques and the implements and the instruments were coming much more from Yarn Wire than from some abstract conception that you had, Aaron, going into the process.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm I don't remember those recording sessions 10 years ago that well either, but I'm pretty sure I went into them without very many preconceived ideas about the sound world. So I probably was really curious what the performers would show me.
Was there a portability aspect of it though too? I think not for the pianos, obviously, but
I think I had this image of basically Russell and Ian, kind of almost only playing inside the pianos or with these small instruments that just sat right near the piano, like by the crook of the instrument. So that sort of visual of not having two separate percussion setups, but having really two pianos open without their lids on and with four performers interacting with them.
So this is an image from the score of a kind of diagram of how to set up the instruments and the percussionists. Can you talk, Aaron, about your choice to situate so much of the work of the piece inside the pianos?
Well, again, I don't know when the idea came in the process, but there was this idea of the kind of sounds speaking from the pianos, not just of the percussion and piano sound, but of the field recordings as well. Mm-hmm. So actually, I guess we did do this at the premiere. I don't know if we've always done it since then because it's a little tougher to set up, but ideally the speakers are under the pianos, or at least some of the speakers are under the pianos, so that the field recordings appear to kind of emanate from the soundboard of the instruments. And so you have the four performers interacting with the inside of the instruments. You have the sounds coming from underneath and activating the instruments. There are also some homemade contact microphones which are attached to the insides of the pianos, which capture especially Laura's and Ning's sounds, really precisely in a really crispy way. And so that idea of kind of everything emanating from inside the body of the instruments became a key concept for the piece. And as I wrote in the program note that you were so kind to read, that it's a kind of model for the architecture itself. It's almost like getting inside of the pianos, getting inside of these passages.
Yeah. It's almost, I was thinking also just that the piano becomes almost like, the horn on a phonograph or something, where it's this piece of furniture that all these recorded sounds are coming out of. And that one other thing, with the sounds having this kind of invisible source, and you've written about this with respect to this piece, that from the perspective of the audience, and I have not seen this piece performed live, but from the perspective of the audience, it's hard to see what's going on, right? If you all are up on a stage, performers, and the percussionists and pianists' hands are kind of inside the instrument, and then these noises are coming out, that kind of invisible music making, I think contributes probably, I would guess, to the way that the amplified acoustic sounds and the electronic sounds and the field recordings kind of overlap, and it's hard to tell which is which. That certainly was my experience the first couple of times I listened to the recording. Without looking at the score, was like, what am I hearing? Where it was very hard to distinguish between the different sources of sound at different points.
Well, thanks. That's a great to hear that you had that experience, because that for me means the piece is working, and Jan Weyer is doing a great job making that happen. I love the image that you mentioned of the piano as a phonograph, or almost
that's really
as
good.
a piece of furniture that you kind of live in. Like, it's nice that we have those old photos of all of us when we were that much younger, thinking about the way that sort of the music is lying on the piano, and maybe some objects, maybe like somebody's sandwich for eating later. I love that idea of the instruments as this space that you kind of live in.
Yeah.
And I think that, that invisibility is something that also is really important in a lot of pieces. And maybe this is one of the earliest ones where, it's not that I don't want it's not that the visual isn't important, but it's not a kind of simple relationship. I want people to be kind of constantly, figuratively, maybe even literally a bit on the edge of their seats, trying to figure out, what did he just do that? Where's that sound? What's that? And, I think that all of the performers, the way that you embody that gesturally has a huge role in how the audience experiences the piece.
I would guess also that for the audience, there are sounds that we don't expect to hear. Like you do, actually, if you could talk a little bit about the, maybe Laura and Ning could talk about this, the use of the pedals in the piece, not just to let the strings resonate, but actually as sounds themselves. And in something you wrote, Aaron, you said something about how the pedals were almost like a kind of echo or a translation of footsteps in the arcade. And that was such a cool, I love that idea. So can you talk about that a little bit, Ning?
Well, I would love to talk about it, but I have to send this question to Laura because I've heard this piece by Aaron actually multiple times. I actually never played it.
Oh, you never did.
No, you did, Ning, but not at the premiere. But we played it in 2011 at the old issue.
That's right.
No, I think that was Jacob.
I think that was Jacob's last performance with us before Ning joined.
I think that Ning had to learn the piece for that show, actually. Well, we can
find out on episode.
Now everyone knows how good I remember that.
It's true that Jacob was the pianist when it was premiered. So.
And recorded, right? Yeah.
And he just did some things that were impossible that Ning literally couldn't do because
I know. He would not tell me his secrets, so I could never play this piece.
Well, I'm actually super glad that Erica asked this question because while we were talking about all this inside the piano stuff, I was having another pungent memory of this piece. But first, to answer your question, Erica, it is you'll understand when I tell the story in a second in short form. But the pedals in this piece, and it's a technique that's definitely not specific to Aaron. I think, Lachenmann uses this technique, other composers, the really sort of intentional heavy, almost a stomp on the pedal, which gives this really percussive release of the dampers away from the strings. And so that happens frequently throughout. So it's this really great sort of, I imagine it's like almost like something opening and closing, which is the, dampers lifting and then resting again on the strings. So you hear that or breathing also along with the sort of percussive attack of the pedal. But I was remembering that's one of the techniques that really got us into trouble once in our early days when we took this piece on the road. We performed at a small liberal arts college somewhere in America, and this piece was on the program. And after the concert was over, the department chair came up to me and tore me a new one, really, on stage. So we learned a valuable lesson about always asking venues or informing them that we intend to play pieces that use extended techniques or inside the piano playing. Thanks, Aaron, for helping us learn that valuable lesson.
Sorry, you had to learn the hard way.
That is an important lesson.
Yeah.
That is, yeah. School of Hard Knocks.
That's funny.
I actually did not know that that famous story is stemmed from this piece. You're famous.
It's a famous story.
Well, I think actually the secrecy of like sound production also played into that.
Absolutely.
Because people didn't know what we were doing.
Yeah,
in
they
the
were
piano,
afraid.
And it sounds really violent at times. I think the contact mics contribute to that, and they were like, "Whoa, they're just ruining our concert grands." Yeah. But it's really like amplified small sounds.
Yeah, we've done way more damaging things.
Well, it also seems like the mystery about how the sounds are produced, and in many parts of the score, how quiet it is. It is really demanding the audience to listen very closely. And it's kind of funny because it demands a real silence in the concert hall. And there's so much, I don't know, I've just been thinking so much about this piece over the last few days. I have so many thoughts about it. But one other image that came to my mind and I don't know if this is familiar to any of the rest of you, but the Berlin Philharmonic a few years ago in their posters and advertisements used these photographs that were taken from the inside of instruments. They're like super close up, and the instruments themselves look like concert halls, and these really sort of magnificent, totally empty, totally quiet, resonant spaces. And of course, a lot of concert halls are built also to look a little bit like the inside of instruments, especially string instruments. But I was just thinking about the way that the pianos are not only echoing the space of the arcades, which is Aaron's sort of primary space of listening, but also the space of the concert hall, which is this other space of careful listening. And I guess I want to think just even a little bit more about the experience of the audience. And maybe we'll talk about that actually, especially when we talk about the next piece, because in that case, there are so many ways in which I would imagine the audience's experience is going to be really fundamentally different than the experience that all of you have. Mm-hmm. But there is something about both pieces that I guess demands a kind of intensity of listening, but also a very open-mindedness of listening, like to be okay with hearing things and not understanding where the sounds come from, or not being able to place the sounds in the world or to match it up to what you see. And so I do have one kind of last question about this piece, and that is the electronics that you're using, Aaron, and sort of how, and it's live electronics, is that right? In this piece? Yeah.
So there's a live concert patch, and it is stocked with samples of yarn wire. So those exact recordings that we talked about making before, in Troutman Hall in Ridgewood, not long after I think you guys started renting that place, and basically the computer responds to the live performance by sprinkling a kind of cloud of short segments of those samples back out to match what is coming from the instruments, according to different criteria. So at certain times I might, choose a subset of those samples or another subset of the samples. There's one exception. So, in some sense, it's not really sound synthesis. It's not really computer sound. It's just playing back recordings. It just does does it really fast, which is a technique that I really love. But there's one exception to that. There's one kind of more synthy sound in the piece that you might have heard in those excerpts, and that's actually a resonance model based on exactly what Laura talked about before, of pressing the piano and letting all the strings vibrate. So that model is inside the computer as well, and it's kind of like a giant echo chamber, a giant plate reverb or something, that at certain times in the piece I open that up and we let that resonance sort of fill the electronic space to match the resonance of the live instrument.
Cool.
And feedback.
And maybe a little bit of feedback.
Let's see. Just gonna look. Oh, I did have one question, I think, before we move on to the next piece. Is there like a double meaning in passage work, like a musical meaning that you're thinking of also, in terms of what the musicians are executing?
Yeah, I think it's a little pun on non-rewarding sort of repetitive exercises that musicians might have to play. I think the opening might feel a little bit like that, this sort of cycling of these sounds of the pick inside the instrument. But of course, it's a much more important meaning is the one about Benjamin and the
arcades.
The Arcades project always sounds like such a silly translation of that title into English. So, the Das Passagenwerk. So I tried to sort of think about the phonetic equivalent of that in English, which it also works out as.
How much were you thinking about what Benjamin has to say about the arcades versus, I guess, basing the piece on your own experience of them as a pedestrian, as a listener? How much of Benjamin is there behind this piece?
I think it's more about my experience of those arcades and sort of making my pilgrimage there inspired by Benjamin, but in the end, really, experiencing it in a very different way. But that's something that you also read in the program note, and that even for me coming to those arcades, almost 100 years later, that the history is such an important layer of even the modern soundscape, seeing crumbling bits of that Belle Epoque architecture, seeing shops that have been there a long time, shops that are gone, storefronts that are closed. Some of them are in fancy parts of town, some of them are in rundown parts of town. Well, they're not rundown anymore, but in 2009 they were. So, I think that Benjamin's sort of presence is definitely there, but it's not such a specific reference to, particular passages in his book. It's really more like taking his book as an invitation to continue the exploration, to which, just as he never finished it, and just as it was undiscovered for decades after his death, we all kind of are completing the Passagen work ourselves.
Yeah, and I like this idea of kind of, you being there physically and imagining like your presence in those passages as being so important to the work. I think that's probably a good way to transition into our discussion of the next piece, which is also about being a person in a city, right? Being 5 people in a city, and experiencing it oftentimes on foot, oftentimes as listeners. There are a lot of real differences between these two works, between passage work and between the kind of problem a city is. But there are also some really interesting similarities. Besides the fact that these are 2 works that you have written for and in collaboration with Aaron Wire. So here we're looking at the first page of the score. We also have, I think, an image of the setup and the lighting plan. If we can see that. Can one of you talk us through what we're looking at here and what the setup is for this piece?
Well, we have different little islands, kind of, right? And that's how I think of them, at least. And like in each one is a kind of scene. I think that's how they're described in the score. They're different scenes, and the scenes are reflective of our own personal recordings that we made with Aaron. And so this setup kind of shows, maybe it's an idealized way that we could set it up in a space with lighting that's happening, with kind of a dispersion of people, so that it's less of a proscenium-based piece and more of a kind of, in its most ideal form, I feel like it should be an installation that can just kind of cycle and go, as opposed to a concert work on a stage. And so this is kind of a layout for that kind of thing.
Yeah, and we've done it different ways. In the premiere and a number of performances, we were spatialized around the audience, but I remember at Transit Festival, it was a totally different geometry of the concert hall, and we did it more like kind of stretching out that scene across the stage in front of the audience, almost more like, changing it from a kind of immersive installation to almost a kind of theater. And that worked too. So it's meant to be flexible, but that idea that somehow there's a physical location associated with different parts of the piece in the performance is a new element that's a little bit different from the previous piece.
And the players move around also, is that right? I don't know if you just said that.
That's right. No, we do. Yeah.
But yeah. Okay, and let's talk also just a little bit about instrumentation for this piece. We have a long list here. I think it's probably hard to see, but there's some interesting sounds that you all are generating. One thing that is noteworthy is the inclusion of the melodica. Who is playing that? Ning or
that would
Laura?
be me. Yeah.
Okay. I was wondering also, we'll get to the excerpts, but are you kind of accompanying your own voices in this piece, or not really?
Not really. Actually,
Okay.
Half the time I don't. Not half the time. I think the whole time I don't play any specific note except for one part of the piece that my note lines up with, I believe, his truck backing up sound, right, Aaron?
Yeah,
Right.
that's right.
And so I'm actually pretty far away from the piano, which Laura plays. I play the melodica and also the kalimba. So there are, those are, both sort of my little setup, and I use different techniques that are not probably very typical of how you would play both instruments.
And if we can look now at the note that Aaron wrote for the score, we'll use this to introduce the excerpts that we're about to hear. One of the things I think that's really interesting and something we definitely need to talk about is the approach of radical personalization that you name and that you write about here. That you take this approach of radical personalization not only to the musical materials sampled with the members of the ensemble and used to compose the instrumental score, but also to include recorded interviews with the musicians about their experiences and memories of the city. And in this case, the city is New York City. They are complemented with field recordings made in corresponding locations, as well as excerpts read by the musicians from the urban planning classic, The Death and Life of Great American Cities by Jane Jacobs. And I think the last line also of this note is really interesting, and I want us to talk about it, that the work is asking this unanswerable question of what sounds like home. So we'll keep these ideas in mind, and we'll watch this montage that it's a few excerpts from the recording of the piece that I selected, and then Russell put together this really nice montage that includes images of a lot of the places that we hear evoked in the piece. Those images and no images actually are used in a live performance, right? So this is something that's specific to this little video montage. So let's watch and listen, and then we'll come back and talk about it.
Encounter all sorts of people, they kind of camp out the whole day, and you get your grill and you fire up the coals, and you have kind of the most amazing view of Lower Manhattan, World Trade Center, the new Frank Gehry building, and all the construction going on there. And you can just stay grilling until about 10, 11 p.m. And the thing is that,
Respectability. Oh my gosh, respectability. Okay. Consider.
Why haven't we got in it? Next.
Another one of my favorite places, this is funny, is Milano Market. You probably know Milano Market. I would go out of my way, take the subway to go there because that was right next to the first apartment that my husband and I shared. So,
and it's both good and bad, but I live directly next to the M train, which where I live is elevated, and the Forest Avenue station is directly outside my living room window. So there's a train that comes every 5 to 10 minutes, 24 hours a day, and it is really loud. I mean, it's loud enough to interrupt conversation.
My favorite place in New York is Fort Tryon Park and the Cloisters up in Inwood. Besides being beautiful, it feels totally separate from the frenetic energy of the rest of the city. And it makes it seem as if I've been removed, both kind of in place and time.
Which, if made clear, will clarify all. No single element a city is. Huh? No single element in a city is, in truth, the kingpin or the key. The mixture itself is kingpin, and its mutual support is the order. That's like the thesis of this entire book,
Yeah,
right?
pretty much. Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
The scenes that illustrate this book are all about us. For illustrations, please look closely at real cities. While you are looking, you might as well also listen, linger, and think about what you see. I like that.
Hey,
Listen
sorry, I
to
couldn't hear you
this
there.
Now. Huh?
Can you repeat that?
Sorry,
lost a little
we
sound.
lost sound for a moment, but now we're back.
Okay, got it. I was just saying I wanted to start with a question for all of you, really, about what it's like to hear this piece now. It's only been 4 years, but so much has changed. So many of you no longer live in New York, and the soundscapes and sound marks of New York have changed, right? I think about, I mean, I'm not in New York, but I know about the sirens and, you know, the daily bells and applause for the essential workers. And like, there's so many ways in which wandering freely around the city is an experience of the past and not the present. But also in your own lives, this is a kind of an oral history project in a certain way, right? It indexes a moment in the past. So what is it like to listen to this piece now? Well, and this wasn't the piece, but this was just excerpts, right? Yeah. Ian, you want to start?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I love hearing it. Yeah, I don't live by the M train anymore, though I live by a highway. Instead of intermittent loud noise, I just hear loud trucks a lot.
You just need a few weeks to get used to it, though, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, then it'll be your
actually, it's
favorite
true.
sound.
Yeah.
Humans are super adaptable. No, but I love hearing it like close up. Just the sound, the intermingling of the acoustic and the recorded.
I now live near. Go ahead, Ning. Go ahead.
Sure, I'll start. So I just want to chime in that I really like a salad right now from Malala Market. Just looking at that, it just brings back a lot of memories, and also just memories of working with Aaron on this piece. You know, I remember Aaron and I recorded my voice part at the Stream Music School in New York City, where I worked for more than 10 years. And, that's also a really nice memory for me to, have sort of this one-on-one time with Aaron. And that remembering the text being really difficult. I'm just like, what? Am I reading this correctly? And then also there are so many, I think, surprising moments just sonically in the piece. So even just listening to it afterwards still just has this really vivid sort of images. Every pocket of sound brings a certain image to me as a listener, sort of removed from playing it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Aaron, how did you decide what to ask the musicians to prompt them? Because I was thinking about the fact that it sounds like it's a spontaneous answer, right? Was it a spontaneous answer? Did you surprise them with the question about their favorite places and their favorite sounds?
I don't think I guess they didn't know ahead of time. But, just to sort of say a little bit about, the genesis of the piece, it's 6 years after Passage Work, and I've almost never written two big pieces for the same group of really close friends, and I really wanted to do something special with that possibility. And we talked before about these sort of two kinds of recordings. There are the field recordings, and there are the recordings of the instruments. And it just seemed like the obvious thing that I had been missing all these years of, well, why can't the musicians also be in the field recordings? Why can't we also talk? Why can't we also talk about their sound experiences? And so it felt like it was something just waiting to happen that I hadn't discovered yet. And again, it was a kind of breakthrough that I've worked with that idea in quite a few more pieces since 2016. But since it was a breakthrough, I didn't quite know what I was doing when I was doing it. So I remember grabbing the subway I was staying up in Washington Heights, and grabbing the subway to Ridgewood and thinking, oh, what am I going to ask them? What are we going to talk about? Because I want to record their voices, but I don't know. And then I saw the Jane Jacobs book on the bookshelf, and I grabbed it running out the door.
Okay, I have a copy.
And that's great. And I was flipping through it on the subway trying to find quotes, and then actually I suggested some quotes, and I let you all choose some quotes kind of at random. So you were thumbing through the book and choosing the moments that grabbed you. And then I just remember jotting down in a little notebook on the subway also the questions I was going to ask. But they're not such piercing interview questions, just, favorite place, favorite sounds that you associate with New York.
Well, I was just thinking about it because when you ask a question like that, then you have to think. And so it's about memories, and it's about it. The answers seem to be so much about the identities and the ways that you four individuals sort of situate yourselves into this city, which is it true for all four of you, is not, the place that you grew up. It's a place that you moved to.
That's right.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. So it's a place that you made into a home for a period of time, the way New Yorkers do. And, you make it into a home by wandering around in the city and finding your places that are your favorite places and returning to them. I was just thinking that if you had given them an assignment to listen to the city, to wander around for a few days listening, they would have maybe come up with different answers, right? But that the answers that they did come up with had so much to do with their own sense of self and history more in the city. It was interesting to...
It was a kind of off-the-cuff thing, Erica.
Yeah.
I remember it I'm looking at the area right now where Aaron asked me this question, and set up the thing. and he's just, what's your favorite sound? And I was like, I don't know, and what's your favorite place? And I think I initially said the deck at this space, which might have been said by multiple people, and then we had to scrap it because we should each have a different one, right?
Well, that's why you start out by saying, what's your second favorite place, right?
Exactly. And so, I just remember this piece. I remember that recording session, and then the first time when we played it with the electronics, hearing your voice come out you're like, whoa, okay, cool. And, when we first played it, I thought it was a cool piece. I've never felt a piece so autobiographical and so intimate. It's very intimate. You feel like we're just speaking to you, the listener. But now with the time between when we did it and recorded it and listening to it now, what's kind of blowing me away is as time goes on, the piece gains more meaning, because then it becomes a document of that time, not just hey, here's you guys. It's like a historical document in addition to a musical piece. And yeah, it's pretty cool.
But it's really personal also. And I should say, when the piece starts with Russell's voice, with Russell's laughter. And I've known Russell since we were literally teenagers, right? 18, 19.
Yeah.
I've heard that laugh. I was like, what is this? That sound of Russell laughing in my ear as I'm listening wearing headphones. And I was thinking about audience. And you mentioned this, I think, in your conversation with RJO on Tuesday, who your audience is and what their expectations are, I think matter. And what this work is, I think maybe we bring different expectations to a work that's this personal. And maybe, in fact, the recording, the studio recording is itself almost like a field recording in some way of the group and of the performance, as opposed to being a timeless musical work, the way that we learn to think about things in the classical music tradition, because it is so personal. And so I guess my broader question is about audience. How have audiences reacted to this work? Have you heard any sort of interesting comments about how they experience it, whether or not they know you as people, as individuals?
I remember.
Yeah,
go, Aaron.
You go.
Yeah.
No, I just this was going to speak to part of what I think is really interesting about that question. I remember after we played it at Transit, Martin Byrons, the curator, the artistic director, and his wife mentioned how it made them think of New York because they had lived there. And actually, I met him in New York. Maybe that's where you met Martin too. And so it sort of triggered different New Yorks for different people. But I also, I'd love to know more about it, but I like the possibility that somebody could hear the piece and never have been to any of these places, but still somehow feel that intimacy even without knowing that, I love the way that, Ning says, oh, you must know Milano Market, because she's talking to me, because of course I know Milano Market, but I love the idea of somebody who's never been there, hearing that conversation and trying to sort of understand what it means to us, and realizing the things, in their lives that might have that kind of a meaning, even if they don't know New York themselves.
You reminded me of something I meant to say with the last one, Aaron. You're another member of the group in this piece. Your voice comes up. We are speaking to you. You're like this hidden narrator, which is kind of cool, because it's not just like a document of us. It's actually a document of our relationship with you and how we made the piece, which is cool. But the same can be said, I think, for passage work in a number of ways. Like, you are actually situated in that piece too, because you took the recordings in the field, and all of that. And I find that kind of, now, I didn't think about it then. I'm just executing, the piece when we're playing it. But now hearing it, I'm like, wow, Aaron's here with us. And that's pretty cool.
Thanks.
But yeah.
I actually have a question to Aaron and the other three members of Yarnwire, because this is actually a piece. I feel really how the kind of occasions you hear your own self-talk, and then you see yourself on the TV. It's like, oh gosh. So I always have that feeling when I'm listening into the backtrack while I'm playing. But this is actually a piece that someone else had played it when I was on maternity leave. During that, it just reminded me, because you had those photos from 2017, and I want to ask you, Aaron or everyone else. So how first of all, is it strange, to have someone else playing, but that's not the voice you're playing? Or, if another group wants to play this particular piece, but it's not their own experience or their own voice, how do we, as audience, see this?
I was thinking about something kind of related, maybe. I was thinking about Julia when she joined us, for that. And in a way, it didn't matter so much because you were still there with us with your voice. We're like, Ning's here, and she was almost an actor. And then I was thinking of how an audience might experience this piece, because it is strange to see us doing these actions. It's not like, like you were saying, Erica, kind of traditional classical thing, or even traditional new music that's very, beginning and middle and end. It's more narrative in a kind of theatrical sense, right? And so I was thinking of an audience and how they might see us as actors, acting out the voice that was happening, and there's a sonic backdrop. There's no images. Aaron and I had talked about trying to figure out like some cell phone thing where like people could move up and like see it. It's too complicated and it would have taken away, right? But like I think for me, experiencing this piece as a theater or that kind of thing, it then allows other people to play it, but they have to learn my mannerisms. Then they would have to like do some character studies. No, I don't know.
No, but it really does break down this idea also that the composer is in charge of everything. It breaks down the hierarchies. You're not just the executants of Aaron's vision for this work. You're not just acting in it, in fact, but you're creating it. And the process of that creation is documented. Those little exchanges, the little, I love that part. And the oh my gosh, and then when we hear you flipping the page, is that what that sound is, where you're flipping the pages at the end of the book? Yeah. I love that because it's so much about that. It's a document of that experience of reading and of thinking and of creating the piece and of collaborating, right?
Yeah. It's of a different time.
Yeah. I have so many more questions, but I know we have to wrap things up. So we will do that. We do have some questions, I think, from...
some people have written in some questions, so let's try and take some real quick. Let's see. We have a question for PG Bluster, and I know who that is. I believe that's Philip Bluma. He says, Aaron, what are you working on right now?
Well, thanks, Philip, if that's indeed you. Wow, that's another wonderful blast from the past, from Berkeley times. Well, I'm just coincidentally, I'm sitting in ZKM in the Center for Media Art in Karlsruhe, Germany, because I'm here working on a new, actually electroacoustic piece for three-dimensional loudspeaker system. But surprise, surprise, it actually is all about the piano interior. And so it is made out of recordings I made inside another piano at IRCAM in Paris with a three-dimensional microphone. So I put the microphone in the piano. So it's actually pretty connected to a lot of ideas we already talked about today, that idea of putting you inside the piano, you thinking of the piano as a concert hall, thinking of the space of the instrument and the space of the surrounding the listener.
Nice. There's at least one more question. They're a little bit more on the technical side, so I don't know if you can answer them in a simple way. But Glenn Hall asks, can Aaron talk about the possibility of integrating Cat Oracle and SPAT? SPAT I know about, and Cat Oracle, that sounds pretty intense.
I love these, the way that these online events work, because it's so wonderful to hear from people who are total surprise, but wonderful surprise to hear from. So thanks for the question, Glenn. So Cat Oracle is just my name for the funny software that I build to do these pieces. So it's kind of like the software that makes the pieces we heard today work. And SPAT is software to spatialize sound. So actually that's what I'm working on now, is combining those two things, taking that granular world and putting it into three-dimensional space. But it's definitely a process that began with the two pieces we talked about today.
All right, and one more from Gabriel asks, does the piece use any of your work on corpus-based timbre control? And is that what you were referencing with concatenative synthesis? Yes.
Yes.
Nice. Well, thanks for the questions, everyone.
Yeah, that's great.
That's really great. And yeah.
I think we're out of time to wrap things up. So I'm going to thank all of you. Thanks for having me again. This was really fun.
Thanks,
and
Erica.
It was nice to meet you, Aaron, and to talk about your music.
Thank you for those wonderful questions and insights. And yeah, so wonderful to hear from all of you about, it's great to hear things coming in the other direction. You write these pieces and then to get to hear some feedback from all of you. So thank you.
Great.
Yeah. Thanks, guys. So next Tuesday, September 15th, we have a conversation with Eric Wubbles and Nate Woolley. And remember to subscribe to our channel, our YouTube channel, and check out our page at patreon.com, where you can support this project in exchange for some exclusive benefits. Thanks for watching.
Thank you all. Bye.
Yeah.
Bye.